They laughed at me, in front of the casket. My uncles, my cousins, they called me a cowgirl with nothing to show but mud-stained boots and wasted years. At my grandfather's funeral. Can you imagine that? What they didn't know was that Grandpa Walt left me everything. And what I didn't know was how far they'd go to take it from me. Stick around because what started as a quiet inheritance turned into a battle for truth, loyalty, and a legacy they never valued but I lived for. The morning of Grandpa Walt's funeral felt like a mistake I couldn't back out of. I'd ironed my one good black dress twice, but it still smelled faintly of hay from the barn. My boots were scrubbed clean, though the red Missouri mud clung like memory. I stood outside the chapel, alone under the slate sky, gripping the brass locket Walt gave me when I turned 12. Inside it, a pressed violet and his scratchy handwriting. My wildflower! That was before anyone spoke, before the snickers started. Guess she didn't inherit much but cow smell, said Uncle Jimmy, the oldest of the 4 Allen brothers, his suit 2 sizes too tight and his mouth forever whiter than his sense. Oh, come on now, Cousin Troy added, nudging his brother like we were all in a bar, not a burial. Walt had to leave her something for all those years she wasted milking goats. She even milked the wrong species now, someone chuckled. My jaw clenched. I kept my eyes on the casket, not on the cluster of suits laughing near the chapel foyer, just far enough from Grandma's friends not to be heard except by me. I was used to being underestimated. It was practically tradition in our family. I didn't go to college, didn't marry rich, didn't leave the farm. I stayed. Through every frostbitten lambing season, through every drought when we sold fence posts for fuel. I stayed because Grandpa Walt stayed. That farm was our shared heartbeat. But none of them saw that. Not the aunts in pearls whispering pity. Not the cousins arguing over who'd get the biggest tractor. Certainly not Uncle Jimmy, already telling a bold lie about what Walt promised him last year's season. And then, Miss Allen, came a gentle voice behind me. I turned. Mr. Dwyer, our family lawyer and one of the few men alive who'd never called me kid or girl. His expression was tight, unreadable. Would you mind stepping into the office with me? Just for a moment. All eyes shifted. Why her? Troy asked, loud enough to hush the hum of conversation. Mr. Dwyer ignored him. I didn't. I lifted my chin, brushed past them, and followed the lawyer down the hall, leaving a trail of raised eyebrows and one stunned silence behind. As the chapel doors closed behind us, I heard Troy mutter, "She ain't getting nothing. Bet she thinks Walt left her a tractor key." They were wrong. But even I didn't know how wrong they were, yet. The office was small, choked with file boxes and the scent of old wood and lemon polish. A dust-frosted window let in a pale wedge of light, enough to catch the fine lines around Mr. Dwyer's eyes as he closed the door behind us. He didn't sit. He just turned to me with that lawyerly posture, shoulders pulled back like the weight of truth could be squared up and carried. "I'm sorry for your loss, Casey," he said softly. I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. He paused. Then, with the care of someone handling something sacred, he lifted a file folder from the corner of his desk. "I'm going to get straight to it," he said. "Walt changed his will, quietly, about 2 months ago. We did it here, just him and me." My stomach tightened. "Your grandfather left you the farm." I blinked. "What? All 86 acres," he said, his voice as steady as a gate latch. "House, barns, equipment, the land, the livestock, it's all yours." My breath caught. For a moment I thought I'd misheard him. Or maybe this was one of those dreams where the dead speak. Mr. Dwyer opened the folder and carefully handed me a yellowed envelope, sealed in wax. The flap bore Walt's crooked W. I recognized it instantly. "He wrote this the day he signed the papers," Mr. Dwyer said. "Said you should read it alone first." With trembling hands, I broke the seal. The handwriting was familiar, spidery, looping, full of strong pauses where his joints probably ached. "Casey girl," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm no longer around to swat the flies off your face or tell Jimmy to stop talking out his rear end. I'm sorry I left before fixing the east fence line, but you always had a better eye for it anyway." I smiled through sudden tears. "You gave me more than help. You gave me dignity in my last years. When the world got too fast, you slowed down with me. You never made me feel like a burden. You made me laugh. And for that, the farm is yours. You earned it tenfold. Don't trust the rest of them, not even for a hot second. They only show up when there's something to take. Let the land be your compass. It won't lie to you. Love you, Wildflower, always did." I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit the paper and bloomed into a dark splotch. I folded the letter gently, like it might bruise. "Why didn't he tell anyone?" I whispered. "Because he knew what kind of fight it would cause. Mr. Dwyer said simply. He wanted to spare you that if he could. Too late for that now. I sat down hard. The desk chair squeaked beneath me. My mind reeled images of sheep births, of late-night harvests, of long silences by the wood stove, of Walt teaching me how to siphon fuel and how to speak coyote. None of it had felt transactional, but maybe to him it had meant everything. Everyone out there thinks he left me nothing, I murmured. Let them, Mr. Dwyer said, folding his hands. We'll record the deed transfer next week. Until then, keep the letters safe. You've got legal ownership, they've got gossip. That night, I sat in my truck in the empty funeral home lot, holding the letter to my chest like a lifeline. I could still hear their laughter from earlier about how I wasted my life milking cows. But Grandpa Walt hadn't seen it that way. He'd seen me. They thought I came from dirt. They were right, but they didn't realize dirt could grow empires. The summer I turned 16, the drought had split the earth open like an old scar. Missouri air hung heavy, syrup thick, and full of sunstroke warnings. I remember it because that was the summer Walt taught me how to run the rusted crane in the south barn. You ever need to lift something heavier than your pride, he'd said. You use this. His grin was sly. But don't tell your grandma. She thinks it hasn't worked since Nixon. That crane was older than either of us had business trusting. It was also the reason I saved his life. It happened on a Sunday. The sky was pale with heat haze, cicadas screaming like a warning siren we didn't understand until later. I was in the chicken shed, ankle deep in feathers, collecting eggs and mumbling curses under my breath. Walt had climbed the old barn roof alone, said he needed to replace shingles, but I think he just missed being up high. That roof was his thinking spot. He'd once told me a man could see his whole life from a rooftop if he squinted right. Then I heard it, a thud, then a silence so loud it made me drop the basket. "Walt!" I shouted. No answer. I ran toward the barn, boots slipping in the dry dust. When I rounded the corner, my blood turned to stone. The ladder lay flat on the ground, a crooked limb in the dirt. And Walt, my tough-as-nails, rope-skinned grandfather, was stranded on the roof, clinging to the gutter with one hand and his pride with the other. "Don't you dare climb up," he barked when he saw me. His face was ghost white. "Get your aunts!" But my aunts were in town with their weekly mimosa brunch, gossiping about quilting circles and Botox. No one would get there in time. "I'm getting you down," I said, heart pounding like a war drum. The barn's interior was a hot, shadowed cathedral of wood and hay. I raced to the far wall where the crane stood, its metal arm like a sleeping beast. The gears groaned when I started it, just like he'd taught me clutch, throttle, lever, swing. My hands shook, but my mind was locked in. I wasn't thinking about what-ifs. I was thinking about getting Walt back on the ground in one piece. It took everything I had to get that hook swinging right beneath him. "Grab it!" I yelled. He hesitated. "Walt!" I said, my voice cracking. "Please." Something in that word must have reached him. He let go of the gutter and caught the hook like a circus act, legs swinging, one boot flying off. I eased the crank. Inch by careful inch, he descended until his boots touched dirt and he stumbled back, legs jelly, arms shaking. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at me. Then he did something he'd only done once before after Grandma died. He hugged me. "You're more than they'll ever understand," he whispered into my hair. Later that day, when the aunts returned, laughing too loud and smelling like mint juleps, they sneered at the grease on my jeans and the dirt on my face. "Lord Casey," Aunt Marla said, wrinkling her nose. "Did you roll through a pig pen?" But Walt stood behind me, one hand on my shoulder. "She saved my life today," he said plainly. "With that old machine y'all said should have been scrapped in the 90s. They went quiet. And then in front of all of them, he brushed my sweaty bangs back and called me his wildflower. "They don't get it," he told me that night, the two of us sitting on the back porch, watching fireflies float like lanterns. "But I do. You belong to this land, Casey. Same way I did, that's rare. Don't let anyone convince you it's small." That summer, I stopped wishing I was someone else. I stopped apologizing for the dirt under my nails or the calluses on my hands. I was Walt's girl, his wildflower, rooted deep and built to weather storms. I just didn't know back then that the biggest storm would be the very people who shared my last name. The keys clinked like truth in my palm as I stood before the gate. Walt's gate. It leaned on tired hinges, paint peeled back to bare metal, the chain link stiff with rust. I stared at it for a long time before I unlocked it, like some part of me needed permission. The land beyond waited in silence, and I half expected Walt to swing the barn door open and shout, "Took you long enough, wildflower." But ghosts don't open gates. I did. The gravel driveway was riddled with weeds. The pasture fences sagged like exhausted shoulders. And the main house, my childhood world, stood gray and hunched, windows like tired eyes. Yet something flickered beneath the decay, like a pulse, like breath. I parked beside the old tractor. It hadn't moved in months, maybe years. Its frame was dust-covered but familiar, like an old friend who still remembered your name even if they couldn't say it. I walked the perimeter with boots crunching against gravel and brittle grass, notebook in hand. The to-do list grew faster than the sweat on my back. Roof patching, well check, livestock audit, hay inventory. There wasn't a corner untouched by time's indifference. But I didn't flinch. Because this farm, it wasn't a curse or a burden, it was a promise. And I'd been chosen to keep it. I was elbow-deep in barn inventory when I heard a familiar voice call out across the field. "Casey Allen, that you?" I squinted toward the fence line. A tall, wiry man in worn coveralls was leaning against the gate, a St. Louis Cardinals cap shadowing his face. Then he stepped forward and my breath hitched. "Emmett," I called, brushing hay from my shirt. "Is that you?" Emmett Jordan, our neighbor from the next property over, had aged in the best way, weathered and calm like an old oak. He used to bring over watermelon in the summer and help Walt mend the southern fence when storms tore it down. "Got the news," he said as he swung open the gate. "'Bout Walt. 'Bout you talking over." I nodded. "Wasn't much of a public announcement." He smiled. "Doesn't need to be. Walt said years ago this place'd be yours. You were the only one who cared." Before I could respond, he walked back to his truck and pulled something from the bed. A heavy sack. "Sunflower seed mix," he said, hauling it over his shoulder. "From my plot, thought it might help get your pasture rotation started." I blinked at him, throat tightening. "You didn't have to. Didn't ask if I had to," he interrupted gently. "Just figured you'd do right by this place." It was the first act of kindness I'd received since the funeral, and it nearly split me open. The next morning, I found a note stuck under the front door. "Casey, if you need help with fencing, I've still got my old post digger. Marla Carson. Used to help Walt during sheeping season back in the day, when I was too young to know what hooves could do to your shin if you weren't quick enough." And it didn't stop there. By the end of the week, folks I hadn't seen since high school were showing up with tool belts and toolboxes. Hank from down the road rewired the chicken coop. Lisa Benson, who once swore she'd never touch mud again after prom, brought over 3 bales of alfalfa and a bucket of goat treats. Even the ex-farmhands, Miguel, Leroy, Delia, people who hadn't been paid in years, rolled up their sleeves without a second thought. It wasn't charity. It was something deeper. "Walt treated us fair," Miguel said as he welded a hinge back onto the barn door. "We ain't forgot." At night, I lay in the old upstairs bedroom, the one with the squeaky floorboards and cracked windows, and stared at the ceiling. The ache in my body was deep, but so was the warmth. They'd tried to humiliate me at that funeral, laughed like the farm meant nothing. But they didn't know the people who built it with him. They didn't know the ones who stayed. I was starting to believe maybe I could save this place. Maybe I wasn't alone after all. 2 weeks into the restoration, the farm was beginning to look less like a ghost town and more like a promise kept. The barn had a fresh coat of paint. The fences along the western pasture stood straight and proud. We even got the irrigation pump sputtering back to life with some spit and ingenuity. I'd started sleeping again, not deeply, but enough. My hands were rougher than ever, but my heart was lighter. For the first time since the funeral, I felt grounded. That's when the knock came. It was a Wednesday morning. I was rinsing out a feed bucket when a white SUV rolled up the gravel drive. Not a neighbor's truck, not a volunteer. A man in khakis stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses shielding his eyes. "Miss Allen." I wiped my hands on my jeans and nodded. He held out a thick envelope. "You've been served." The air left my lungs in a single, dry breath. I took the papers numbly. Legal documents, heavy with formality and cold intent. I waited until he was gone, watched the SUV disappear over the ridge before I peeled the seal open with a knife. My name, my grandfather's, and my cousin Troy's, all printed in sterile, indifferent font. They were suing me. Petition for probate will contestation. Claiming Walt was mentally unfit, that I'd unduly influenced him in his final days, manipulated a senile old man. The words blurred. I pressed a hand to my chest, the other gripping the edge of the counter to stay upright. There was more. A motion to freeze assets pending litigation. A request for discovery of all farm-related financial records. A hearing date already scheduled. Then I saw the last page, a printout from Facebook. Troy had posted a selfie with the caption, "Taking back what's ours. Justice for Walt Farm reclaimed 2025. My vision went white around the edges. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was war." I sat down on the porch steps, the weight of the envelope heavy in my lap. The breeze rustled the oaks, but it felt like the world had gone silent. Inside, on the hall table, Walt's letter sat in its frame. "Don't trust the rest of them, not even for a hot second." How could I have underestimated them? I thought their cruelty ended with whispers and laughter in the church foyer. I thought they'd scoff, maybe stomp around, but ultimately walk away. I was wrong. By sundown, word had spread. I didn't say a word to the neighbors, but Emmett showed up anyway with 2 sacks of feed and a 6-pack. "Don't let them take it from you," he said, handing me the cans. "You earned this. He knew it. We all did." I nodded, too hollow to speak. That night I ran my fingers over the pages of the court filing, trying to make sense of the betrayal. Every line was a lie stacked on a foundation of arrogance. They couldn't stand that he left it to me, not because they loved the land, but because they loved what they thought it could be worth. They saw inheritance. I saw home. I stayed up late, digging through a tin box under the stairs where Walt kept old receipts and ledgers. I needed proof, not just of his will, but of our relationship. That he trusted me, that I was more than a girl with dirt on her boots. And beneath a pile of lambing charts from 2009, I found it. A crumpled grocery list with his handwriting. At the bottom, scribbled in red ink, "Tell Dwyer to update the will. Casey deserves it, only one who never left me." It wasn't notarized, it wasn't formal, but it was real, and it was a start. The legal freeze hit faster than I thought. By Friday, the farm's bank accounts were locked. Payroll stalled. Feed suppliers stopped deliveries mid-cycle. Even the co-op flagged our credit line pending legal review. It felt like someone pulled the emergency brake on a moving truck. Everything jolted, stopped, and then began slowly sliding backward. I stood in the feed barn, staring at a ledger with more red ink than a butcher's apron. The goats were already on half rations. The sheep needed deworming meds we hadn't reordered. I had 3 unpaid invoices stacked on the desk and only $78 in the operating account. The volunteers noticed, even if they didn't say much. Lisa still came by with buckets of scraps, pretending they were just leftovers. Emmett dropped off a few bales without explanation, but even kindness couldn't cover payroll. Delia, one of Walt's oldest farmhands, pulled me aside after lunch. "You need to tell us if we should start looking elsewhere," she said gently, dirt streaking her cheeks. "We'll stay as long as we can, but folks have kids to feed." I nodded. I understand. But what I couldn't say, was that I had no plan. I was staring down a lawsuit I couldn't afford to fight and a farm I couldn't afford to save. That night I laid in Walt's old bed, surrounded by his flannel shirt still hanging in the closet, and counted heartbeats instead of sheep. 1, 2, 3 at 68, I got up, turned on the porch light and made the call. The bank manager, Mr. Camden, answered on the 4th ring, bleary but professional. "I need a personal loan," I said. He hesitated. "Casey, with the accounts frozen, I'm not sure. I don't want it against the farm, just me, my name, whatever's possible." A long pause. "How much are we talking?" I swallowed. 10,000. He let out a slow breath. "Let me check what we can do. You'll need collateral. I'll bring the title to my truck." The next morning, I walked into that bank with shaking hands, signed away the only vehicle I owned, and walked out with a short-term loan and a mountain of quiet shame. I used every penny to buy feed, pay the core staff, and keep the lights on another month. But survival didn't feel like victory. It felt like desperation with a polite name. And the worst part? The animals knew. Or maybe I imagined it, but their eyes seemed heavier, like they could sense the tension in the air, the fragility of everything holding this place together. Some nights I woke up to phantom bleeding or the wind rattling the coop door, and my heart pounded like the whole place was on fire. I'd run outside barefoot, breath fogging in the cold, only to find silence, false alarms, or maybe just panic attacks dressed like barn calls. On day 9 of the freeze, the water heater cracked in the bunkhouse. Miguel came into the kitchen with ice-cold fingers and told me he'd sleep in his truck if he had to. "I can't keep asking this of you," I said, tears threatening. "You didn't ask," he replied, sipping lukewarm coffee. "We stayed because this place matters, don't forget that." But even so, I started seeing the subtle shifts. People packing slowly, hesitations in their eyes. They were loyal but not immortal, and I didn't blame them. That night, as I tried to balance the books again, something broke in me. I stared at the numbers, the zeros, the debt column, and suddenly I was gasping, really gasping, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I ended up on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, counting tiles to distract myself from the tightness in my chest. I stayed like that until the sun rose through the cracked blinds, painting lines across the linoleum. I knew then I couldn't do this alone anymore. Not financially, not emotionally, not without breaking. Something had to give. And if pride was the first thing to go, so be it. I filmed the first video at dawn. No makeup, no filter, no script, just me, a cracked voice, and the wind carrying the scent of hay and frost behind me. The camera shook slightly in my hand as I held it up in front of the red barn, its paint peeling in jagged scars. "My name is Casey Allen," I began, swallowing the lump in my throat. "And this is the farm my grandfather left me." I tilted the phone toward the pasture where 2 goats nibbled half-heartedly at yesterday's hay, then back to my own face, hollow-eyed and raw. "I grew up here, learned how to birth lambs in a thunderstorm, how to mend a fence with twine and grit. I didn't go to college or chase city dreams. I stayed because this land raised me." I paused, heartbeat pounding. "But now my family is suing me, for all of it. They say I tricked my grandfather, that I don't deserve this farm. They've frozen my accounts, stalled my feed supply, and I'm one more bad night away from losing everything he built." The words came faster then, poured out like floodwaters. "I've taken a personal loan against my truck. I've watched my crew work without pay. I've had panic attacks in the barn at midnight wondering how I'm going to make it one more week." Then I stepped back and let the camera pan slowly across the barn, the pastures, the faded silo. And I said the truth that scared me most. "I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for eyes. If people see this, maybe someone somewhere will care enough to help." I uploaded it to a TikTok account I named it Wildflower Farmstead. And then I waited. I didn't expect anything. I went back to shoveling manure and fixing a busted latch on the chicken coop. I boiled potatoes for dinner and tried to ignore the tightness in my chest that had settled into something close to constant. It was Miguel who burst through the barn the next evening, phone in hand, eyes wide. "Casey," he said, "you need to see this." The video had been reposted by a teacher in Oregon, a woman I'd never met, with a caption that simply read, "This girl is fighting for her legacy. Let's not let her do it alone." It had 80,000 likes. Comments were flooding in. "Where do we donate? My grandfather's farm was sold off when he died. I wish I'd had her courage. Who sues someone over a will? That family should be ashamed." A link had been added. My Venmo, buried in the bio, started lighting up like Christmas. $5, 10, 20, then 100 from someone named Bev in Colorado. "For Grandpa Walt, reminds me of mine." I sat on the milking stool and cried like I hadn't in years. Not just from relief, but from being seen. The next day I posted again, this time with the goats. I showed them munching hay, then turned the camera back to me, smiling weakly. "Thanks to a teacher in Oregon and a bunch of kind strangers, our animals are eating again this week." I showed the ledger, the court papers, the barn. And over the next 3 days, donations kept trickling in, not floods, not miracles, but drops of hope. Enough to order the meds for the sheep, enough to buy welding wire to fix the broken gate, enough to give Delia and Miguel partial pay without dipping into loan funds. Most of all, it gave me strength to face the barn doors every morning. The messages poured in from other women, especially ones who'd been ignored, doubted, underestimated. "Don't let them win," one wrote. "I lost my house in my divorce. Watching you fight gives me courage." Another, "My uncle tried to steal my father's will too. Keep going, girl." I wasn't just holding a farm anymore. I was holding space for every woman who'd ever been told she couldn't run something built by a man. Every woman told she didn't deserve what she'd worked for. The legal fight was far from over, but I had witnesses now, not just strangers, allies. The letter came folded inside a manila envelope, stamped with urgency and smug authority. Emergency injunction request, temporary cease operations on disputed property. I read it once, then again. The words didn't change, but my understanding of what they meant sharpened like a blade. They were trying to shut me down completely. The family's lawyer, some polished bulldog named Gregory Voss, had filed an emergency motion to freeze all activity on the farm, citing media manipulation, unauthorized fundraising, and the phrase that stung worst, Exploitation of the decedent's memory for personal financial gain. My hands trembled. They had seen the TikTok videos, the teacher's repost, the donations trickling in, and instead of feeling shame for what they'd done, they found new ammunition. Within 48 hours, the court granted a temporary order. No volunteer access, no commercial transactions, no structural changes. Any violation could be considered contempt. They turned Walt's legacy into a legal chessboard, and every move I made now risked jail time. When I posted a video explaining what had happened, I kept my voice steady. I had to. "This is what power looks like when it's afraid," I said, eyes locked with the lens. "They don't care about the animals or the land. They care that a girl they mocked is standing between them and a piece of dirt they never wanted, until it became valuable." That video hit harder than I expected. Viewers doubled. Comments exploded. But views don't buy hay. And TikTok can't replace a stolen tractor. Because yes, on day 4 of the lockdown, I had to sell it. Walt's John Deere. The same one I learned to drive at 12, sitting on his lap while he sang out-of-tune Johnny Cash songs. The engine still purred like it remembered us. Selling it felt like tearing out a piece of my own history. It brought in enough to cover overdue vet bills and to pay Delia and Miguel what I owed them. But once it was gone, a silence settled over the barn like grief. "I feel like I'm losing him," I confessed to Emmett one night, watching the sunset from the porch. "You're not," he said simply. "Walt ain't in that tractor. He's in the way you don't quit." But something in me did feel like quitting. I walked the pastures alone that night. The stars came out cold and clear above me like watchers who wouldn't interfere. The goats stood clustered in the moonlight, their quiet presence a kind of comfort. I touched their ears one by one, grounding myself. Still here, still fighting. But even I had to admit I was close to the edge. The bank called about my loan. 30 days left on the grace period," they said politely. "Then payments begin." Lawyer Amara, the one I'd found through a nonprofit hotline, was doing her best, but she was overwhelmed. Court delays, red tape, and a slick legal team working overtime to drain me dry. I stopped sleeping. I stopped filming. Even the animals seemed subdued. On day 10 of the injunction, I got a call from Lisa. "We can't help anymore," she said, voice thick with regret. "They said we'd be trespassing." I didn't blame her, but it still hurt. By day 12, the barns were quiet. No hammering. No laughter. No footsteps. Just creaking boards and the low groan of a place being slowly choked to death. And me? I was holding on by fingernails, sleepwalking through chores, whispering Walt's name like a prayer that wouldn't catch. If they wanted to break me, they were close. Until one evening, just as the sky bruised with nightfall, I opened an email that made me sit bolt upright. Subject: Emergency Rural Farm Relief Initiative. Assistance inquiry received, and the first line. "Hi Casey, we saw your video. We'd like to help." I must have read that email 6 times before I dared believe it was real. The subject line still burned behind my eyelids. Emergency Rural Farm Relief Initiative. Assistance inquiry received. A woman named Tasha, program director for a nonprofit I'd never heard of, wrote with calm authority and zero fluff. "Casey, we've seen your video. Your story has moved not only our team but several of our partner advisors. If you're willing, we'd like to set up a call to offer support, both legal and logistical. This is what we do. Let us help." I responded within 5 minutes. That same night at 8:00 p.m., I found myself on a Zoom call with a panel of people who felt like lifelines. Tasha wore a denim shirt, her silver braid over one shoulder, and introduced herself with a warm, no-nonsense energy. Beside her was Andre, a soft-spoken legal coordinator with a background in rural land disputes, and Cherie, a logistics officer who used to manage feed supply chains for disaster zones. "This isn't just your fight anymore," Tasha told me. "This is bigger than that. It's about what this farm stands for. We see women like you all over the country, holding down soil with bare hands while people try to rip it out from under them. But you went public, and you did it with courage." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I exhaled into the silence. Tasha continued, "We're coming in with a 3-pronged strategy. First, we're assigning you a pro bono litigator, someone who's been through this kind of will contest before. Second, we're issuing an emergency grant for interim feed. And third, we're pushing for a review of the injunction itself. That lockout order, it reeks of overreach." I nodded so fast it made my head spin. "What do I need to do?" I asked. Tasha smiled. "Just breathe, we'll help you do the rest." The next morning, a pallet of feed bags arrived on a flatbed. I stood in the driveway, speechless, as volunteers in branded jackets unloaded supplies like a military op. Emmett pulled up just in time to see me crying into a burlap sack of lamb starter. He tipped his hat. "Looks like the cavalry showed up after all." I laughed through the tears. For the first time in weeks, the air didn't feel like it was strangling me. Later that day, my phone buzzed with a new name. Amara Denton, an actual litigator with sharp eyes, a sharper tongue, and a resume that made my cousin Troy's lawyer look like a mall kiosk clerk. She dove into the court filings with surgical precision. "These claims," she said, flipping through scanned copies, "they're brittle, built on assumption and theatrics. We'll fight fire with facts." Then, as if the universe had been waiting for a signal, the donations picked up again. Not just cash, tools, feed, vet coupons. Even a portable milking machine showed up from a woman in Vermont. The note read, "For the girl who never walked away from the land. Stay." The nonprofit created a temporary legal shield for volunteer re-entry, using a clause that allowed essential support staff for animal welfare under dispute conditions. One by one, the crew came back, eyes cautious but hopeful. Delia brought her nephew. Lisa returned with 2 spare fence posts. Miguel came in grinning, holding up a thermos. "Coffee's back," he said. "So are we." The silence of the barn finally broke. We worked like redemption was on the line. Amara filed a motion to limit the scope of the injunction, and the court, perhaps feeling the weight of public eyes, granted partial relief. Volunteers were legally allowed back. The farm could resume minimal operation. It wasn't everything, but it was enough to breathe. That night, I walked the barn with a flashlight, counting livestock, and running my fingers along the walls like I was touching an old friend's face. It didn't feel like the end anymore. It felt like maybe, just maybe, we had a shot. It came on a Monday morning, tucked in a plain white envelope with a judge's seal. Notice of trial date Allen v. Allen et al. I read it twice before whispering the words aloud, like saying them might help them settle inside my bones. 3 weeks from today. Amara had warned me it might move fast. The pressure from public attention, your video, the reposts, even the nonprofit's petition to the court, it's all pushing them to act, she explained over the phone. "It's good. We want fast. Momentum is our ally right now." I nodded, gripping the edge of the kitchen sink. 3 weeks, I repeated. 3 weeks to gather what we had. 3 weeks to put every broken shard of my relationship with Walt into a courtroom story that made sense to strangers in suits. I walked the farm slower after that, not just checking on things but noticing them, Walt's old hat still hanging by the back door, the dent in the coop where a goat once kicked a feed can, the sun-bleached ledger board where he'd carved Harvest 2012 like it mattered more than gold. We needed more than a notarized will. We needed context, evidence of intention, of legacy, of trust. "You're not just proving he signed the paper," Amara told me. "You're proving why he signed it. That it wasn't manipulation, it was continuity." So I went looking. Through boxes of seed invoices, faded calendars, tax forms, and scribbled grocery lists. I checked every drawer, every jacket pocket, every old mug stuffed with nails and pens. For 10 days, I found nothing. Then came the storm. Lightning rolled over the pasture like a freight train, and rain slammed the roof like it had a vendetta. In the chaos of rushing out to check the goats, I slipped in the mud near the south barn and hit the storage shed door with my shoulder hard enough to pop the latch. It swung open. Inside, I found something I hadn't seen since I was a teenager, Walt's black work trunk. Locked, dusty, and bearing the faded label. "Tools and records, property of Walter Allen." I carried it inside and pried it open with a crowbar, heart hammering. Inside were grease-stained tools, a rusted wrench, a cracked thermos, and beneath it all a folded leather binder tied with twine. When I unwrapped it, I held my breath. Ledger pages, farm records, supply orders, and at the back a single loose sheet, Walt's handwriting. "Casey knows this place better than anyone. She'll carry it forward long after I'm gone. No matter what they say, this place is hers." Beneath it, his initials. And something else, a faint smudge in the corner that looked oddly deliberate. I flipped the sheet over and gasped. A notary stamp. Amara nearly fell off her chair when I showed it to her during our next call. "This changes everything," she whispered. "They'll still argue, of course, but this isn't just a statement, it's evidence. And more than that, it's intention. This proves he knew exactly what he wanted." We scanned, filed, and prepared our submission. And for the first time since the funeral, I allowed myself to believe I might actually win. not just the farm, but the right to be seen as what I was, not a girl who got lucky with a will, but the woman who earned it acre by acre, the woman Walt chose. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the walls were painted the same beige as the DMV, neutral enough to drain the life from anyone who walked in. I sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded so tightly my knuckles ached. Amara sat beside me, poised and steel-eyed. Across the aisle, Troy, his smug grin coiled like a snake under a blue suit, and Uncle Jimmy behind him, arms folded like a coach who thought the win was already his. The judge, a pale man with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression like weak old toast, called the room to order. It began with formalities. The will, the objections, the claims that I had inserted myself into Walt's declining mental health, that I'd exploited loneliness and undermined family interest. Troy's lawyer practically oozed confidence as he slid their evidence forward, 3 notes, supposedly handwritten by Walt, expressing regret about changing the will. Amara raised a single eyebrow. "Your Honor, we request authentication on all documents presented." A forensic handwriting expert was already on standby. One glance was all it took. "These notes are forgeries," she testified. "Different pressure, smoother pen glide, and this one dated after the supposed signature. Walt Allen had documented arthritis. This flow would have been impossible without digital assistance." Troy paled. Then Amara stood. Calm, deliberate, she introduced Walt's signed will again, then the ledger pages, then the notary-sealed letter found in the trunk, and finally Walt's video file. I had forgotten about it. Amara hadn't. "Recorded 1 month before his passing," she told the judge. "Mr. Allen requested it remain private unless legal challenge arose." We watched in silence as Walt's weathered face filled the screen, filmed from the porch swing. "If you're seeing this," he began, "someone's trying to take what I left for Casey." He looked straight into the lens. "She didn't take advantage of me. She carried me. Through the hard years, the floods, the losses, when no one else showed up, she did. I made my decision clear in writing. Anyone who says otherwise never saw how she worked." He smiled faintly. "She's my wildflower, always will be." The courtroom was still. Even the judge blinked slower. Troy stood up suddenly. He was confused. He had dementia. Amara rose sharply. "There is no clinical documentation of mental decline. None, just bitterness from a family who didn't earn what they thought they were owed." The judge adjusted his glasses. "I've heard enough." He ruled within the hour. The will stood. All claims dismissed. My rights were reaffirmed. The farm was mine. As my family stormed out, Troy cursing under his breath, Uncle Jimmy pretending not to see me, I sat perfectly still. I didn't cry. I didn't gloat. I just breathed. Because I knew this wasn't about winning. It was about honoring. That spring, I changed the name on the mailbox, Wildflower Park. We opened the gates on a soft Sunday afternoon. Children ran through the grass, feeding goats and giggling under the barn archway. There was a new sign at the entrance. "In memory of Walter Allen, who planted more than seeds." Local schools booked field trips. The nonprofit helped us build a small petting zoo. Lisa taught gardening workshops out of the old tool shed. Emmett carved benches from fallen trees. I built a corner inside the barn called Walt's Nook, where kids could sit, read stories, and hear about what it means to love something enough to fight for it. The farm didn't just survive. It grew. And so did I want to leave you with this. They told me I was nothing but a girl with dirt on her boots. But dirt, it grows things. And girls like me, we rise, even when they try to bury us. Especially then. Tell me, have you ever had to fight for something everyone said you didn't deserve? Let me know in the comments. And if you believe in legacy, in standing your ground, in turning pain into purpose, hit that like button and share this story. Because somewhere out there, another wildflower's about to bloom. Thank you for listening.